What makes moving on confusing is that part of you still cares. Not in the same desperate way as before, not in the way where your entire life revolves around her anymore. But there's still a part of you that remembers the connection, remembers the good moments, remembers how deeply you cared about her. And because of that, you start questioning yourself. You start wondering what healing is supposed to look like. Maybe moving on means becoming cold. Maybe you're supposed to ignore her if she ever reaches out again. Maybe you're supposed to become emotionally detached, distant, unaffected. Because deep down, you're afraid that if you stay soft, if you stay warm, if you stay kind, then maybe you haven't actually moved on. So your mind keeps creating imaginary scenarios. You picture her texting you someday, calling you unexpectedly, running into you somewhere months later. And in your head, you rehearse different versions of yourself over and over again. One version ignores her completely. One version gives dry, one-word replies. One version acts overly nonchalant just to prove that she no longer affects you. And then there's another version of you that still wants to respond naturally, still wants to smile, still wants to treat her with warmth instead of bitterness. And that's where the confusion begins, because you don't know which version of yourself is actually healed. Modern breakup advice makes it seem like emotional numbness is strength. Like the colder you become, the more healed you are. Like indifference has to be performed in order for it to be real. But that's not always true. Sometimes bitterness is just unresolved pain wearing confidence as a disguise. Sometimes coldness is still emotional attachment, just expressed differently. Because if you still feel the need to punish someone emotionally, prove a point, protect your ego, or carefully control how you come across to them, then emotionally they still have power over you. Right now, you may be wondering how to respond if she ever reaches out to you. You think being cold might be rude. On the other hand, you think being warm and responsive is weakness. But the truth is, when you actually heal, you will naturally respond to her with no bitterness, and you will actually interact with her without attaching emotional meaning to it. In other words, you will engage with her naturally in conversation, and you will not feel bad afterward or second-guess whether you came off weak, whether you spoke too much, or whether she still feels like you are not over her. Because when you actually move on and heal, what she thinks about you stops carrying emotional weight. You stop treating every interaction like a psychological battle. You stop trying to appear healed. You stop trying to sound unaffected. You stop trying to win the breakup silently in your head. Because once you truly heal, her perception of you no longer controls your emotional state. You simply respond as yourself. Not a colder version of yourself. Not a guarded version of yourself. Just yourself. And the strange thing is, once that happens, your mind becomes much quieter. You stop spending hours replaying imaginary conversations. You stop fantasizing about revenge, success, glow-ups, or finally becoming better enough for her to regret losing you. You stop mentally rehearsing future encounters, trying to decide whether you should act warm or distant. Because emotionally, the attachment starts dissolving naturally. And eventually she becomes what most people from your past become. Someone you once knew. Not in a cold or harsh way, not in a bitter way, just naturally. Because when you truly heal, her presence, her absence, her opinion of you, or the possibility of her reaching out again no longer defines your emotional state. And ironically, that's usually the moment you realize you've actually moved on. Not because you stopped caring completely, but because the thought of her no longer changes who you feel like you need to become.